Hello and welcome. It's War and Politics channel. My name is Vladislav Novikov. Today, joining us now is Uriel Epstein, CEO of the Renew Democracy Initiative. Uriel, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me on.
Former President Trump recently said that the last meetings between the US, Russia and Ukraine were very good, and that there is a high chance of Russia-Ukraine deal happening this week. Why do you think he's saying that now? Do you believe such a deal is actually realistic?
No, I do not believe that such a deal is realistic. He's saying that now because either last week or 2 weeks ago, Secretary Marco Rubio announced that if progress were not made within the next few days, then the U.S. would lose interest and we would move on. Now, this of course comes on the heels of then candidate Trump promising that he would solve the war in Ukraine in 24 hours. It's now been almost 3 months, and it's very clear that his attention span is roughly analogous to a goldfish. So it's clear that he's losing interest and that he is recognizing just how difficult this war will be to resolve. Now, what we saw happen over the course of last weekend when dictator Vladimir Putin announced a quote-unquote ceasefire for a day or two over Easter, it was clearly done to give Trump an opportunity to say that Putin is looking to meet America somewhere halfway, and that the true culprit here, the reason that no deal can be made, is not Russia, but rather Ukraine. And so with Trump saying that a deal can be made this week, what I anticipate will happen is that they will announce some far-fetched possibility, and then President Zelensky will be forced to say no, giving Trump the excuse that he wants for the United States to actually pull back and pull away, not only from the conflict as a whole, but more importantly and more specifically from supporting Ukraine.
Mm-hmm. In your opinion, is Trump actively manipulating these issues, or is he just not well informed? About ceasefire.
Look, I think the truth is I don't know. I don't know whether, I don't know President Trump. I've never met the man. I've never spoken with him. So I don't know what he does know and what he doesn't know. And I don't know what his motivations are. What I do know are what actions he's actually taking and what statements he has made or is, in the process of putting out. And what we're seeing from these pronouncements is that, number one, he has a reflexive desire to believe anything that Vladimir Putin says. And this is not unique to this term. If you recall that famous meeting in Helsinki back in Trump's first term, Putin said that he was not involved in trying to influence American elections. All 17 of America's intelligence agencies agreed that he was involved. And Donald Trump, during that famous press conference, came out and said that he believed Vladimir Putin, which by definition means that he believed a dictator in a foreign country over America's own intelligence agencies. So where does that leave us? Again, I don't know whether Trump is being manipulated, whether he is ill-informed, whether he has bad advisors. But what I do know is that it appears that he has this instinct to trust what a dictator says over what someone like Zelensky, a democratically elected leader, says. And that means that even for those who try to give him good information, and I believe that General Kellogg, the envoy to Ukraine, is trying to give him good information, he is liable to ignore it. And instead, he listens to his envoy to Russia, technically his envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, who has no professional background as a diplomat, who has no military background, whose only qualification to be in the role in which he's in is the fact that he is loyal to Donald Trump and he was a successful real estate developer. That's it. And this is the man determining American foreign policy with respect to Russia. And he's the one who is saying all of these incredibly nice things about Vladimir Putin, talking about striking up a friendship with the Russian dictator. Meanwhile, a few weeks, I think a month or so ago, when there were direct talks between Russia and the United States in the Middle East, Russia said that they did not want General Kellogg to attend those talks. And lo and behold, General Kellogg did not attend those talks. So now Russia is actually dictating which of our envoys, which of our ambassadors they are negotiating with. I mean, I'm pretty sure that this is unprecedented in American diplomatic history.
Okay, but so do you feel that Putin is openly using Trump, or are they on the same team?
Again, I don't know. I think that it's very clear that they naturally sympathize with one another. I think when Trump looks at Putin, he actually envies him. Putin has no opposition in Russia. He controls the country with an iron fist, and he has done so for the last 25 years. And I think that's something that Donald Trump wishes he could do in America. As of now, he still cannot, despite his best efforts. And so I think, for one, he actively wishes to have this, and therefore he emulates Putin and he admires him and he wants to believe him. Number two, Putin has said, as you might recall, that there is no such thing as a former KGB agent. And Putin, of course, is nothing if not the epitome of a KGB agent. And that means that he would not be doing his job if he were not trying to manipulate Donald Trump. Fiona Hill, who is one of the foremost experts on Russia in the United States. She was previously an advisor on the National Security Council to Donald Trump in his first term, has spoken out numerous times. I've spoken with her personally, so I know, she said this to me directly, that of course Vladimir Putin tries to manipulate Trump. Of course he tries to use him. And Donald Trump, even though those around him try to prepare him for these interactions, try to get him ready and try to give him the tools he needs to be able to actually win a negotiation with Putin, he refuses to use any of those tools. He does not listen to them. And so he goes into conversations with Putin unprepared and essentially, I think, ready to be manipulated. So again, a lot of people will ask the question of, is Donald Trump an agent of Russia or, things like that. Mm-hmm. I do not think that's the right question. Because right now, there's no way to know whether or not he's an agent or whatever, whether, what the KGB may or may not have said to him in 1987 when he was over there. But what I think the right question is would Donald Trump be doing anything differently if he were an agent of Russia? That's the question we should be asking. And unfortunately, at least for now, the answer is no.
Mm-hmm. Bloomberg says markets are starting to see that Trump's real trade is selling America. The trade war goes on, but is the US actually winning? And now there is talk about firing the Fed chair, which could hit the dollar. How are Americans reacting to all this?
Not well. I'm looking at my own retirement savings. I mean, literally, I was looking at them just this morning, and they have taken a massive hit. I just invest in the American stock market, essentially, in terms of like an index fund, which emulates the market as a whole. And over the course of the last couple of weeks, I think I've lost, around 12%? And so I think it's no surprise that American markets are recognizing that the type of trade wars that Donald Trump is encouraging are impossible for America to win. Because tariffs can be a useful tool if they are targeted and specific and well thought out and predictable. Unfortunately, the current tariffs that Donald Trump is trying to impose on essentially the entire world are none of those things. They're not targeted, they're not predictable, they're not well thought out. As a result, it's no surprise that American companies are going to start having to pay much higher prices. B, American exports are actually going to suffer when other countries retaliate against us. And C, that the stock market and the international market as a whole is going to drop, and I think it's going to continue to drop, not only because of these tariffs, but because of the second thing you noted, which is Trump's behavior. Trump has been threatening to fire Jerome Powell, the head of the Federal Reserve now, for weeks. Jerome Powell is generally perceived, and I believe rightfully so, as a steady hand on the wheel. You know, if you can disagree with him on the margins, etc., but he is generally seen as a real professional whose priority is the economic and fiscal health of the United States. And if Donald Trump were actually to fire him, the impact on the markets that would have would be comparable to the 2008 recession. So in short, are the markets starting to realize the danger that we're in? Yes. But unfortunately, I think there's a lot further we can fall.
When Trump talks about the Fed, is that still democracy or more like a dictatorship? To me, it feels a bit like what Putin does.
Well, you know, I think I've been hearing a lot of people say that, you know, Donald Trump is like a dictator. He's similar to Putin. And I reject that. I say no, that he is not a dictator. We are not a dictatorship. And the reason I say that, and this is important, is because if he were a dictator, and if America was a dictatorship, then people would have an excuse to do nothing. They would have an excuse to stay home, because if they went out and they protested, or they went out and they did something that the administration did not like, they could be locked up. I was reading the news, and just the other day, Putin threw a 19-year-old girl in jail for 3 years because she happened to put up a Ukrainian poem on some statue as a protest. And now she's going to be in prison for 3 years. Thankfully, in the United States, I can still go out and I can put on any poem I want on any statue, and the worst they could do is they could fine me. They certainly can't put me in prison. They can't do any of those things. So, number one, we are not a dictatorship yet. But that last word is really important. Yet. The things that Trump is trying to do undoubtedly are leading us in that direction. He is centralizing power in the presidency in unprecedented ways. I mean, over the course of the last few decades, a number of presidents, both Republicans and Democrats, have tried to bring in more and more and more power into the executive branch of the United States, making our president an incredibly powerful person. But Donald Trump is doing it in a way that's never been done before, probably since Franklin Delano Roosevelt in World War II. So the power that Trump wields is the greatest power any American president has had in 80 years, and he keeps trying to add to it. The tariffs are clearly one way he's doing that, right? Tariffs are essentially a tax. Under the American Constitution, it is Congress, the legislature, that has the power to levy taxes, not the president. And yet here you have the president having taken that power for himself and essentially having increased the tax burden on the American people by a massive amount. We're talking hundreds of billions of dollars in like that over the course of just a few days. Now he's trying to get rid of independent agencies. He's trying to fire people who otherwise have independent power, like Jerome Powell, and install loyalists in their position, whose priority would not necessarily be the interests of the United States, but instead they would be the interests of President Donald Trump. They would be loyal to him personally. And again, you know, that's something, the extent to which he's doing this is something that is unprecedented in American history. And so even though I started this off by saying that he is not Vladimir Putin and that he is not a dictator, the most important word that I want your viewers to take away from this is the word yet.
So you're saying Trump is starting down the road of dictatorship?
Yeah. I think we're starting to see that. And I mean, look, I'll tell you that the other day, I was talking to a friend of mine who's a very prominent American commentator. And he was traveling internationally, and he emailed me asking me to be available at a certain time of day when he would be coming back into the country, because he was worried, and his wife was worried, that they might stop him at the border and cause problems for him. That's unprecedented. I mean, this is someone who is a prominent American political figure, and yet he's literally worried about coming back into the United States because he's concerned that the administration might try to find some excuse to make life more difficult for him, because he has the audacity to speak out against the American president. And again, that's not something that's ever happened before. I mean, the most vociferous critics of Barack Obama or George Bush never worried that they might have problems crossing the border into the United States. And yet today, we're living in a different situation.
Okay, and a quick word on China. Do you think they're holding up well under pressure? What kind of strategy are they using, and is it working?
So the Chinese economy is not in good shape right now. Their economy is very weak. And as a result, what they're trying to do is, first of all, Donald Trump is giving them a massive gift with some of these tariffs. So even though Donald Trump ostensibly is, quote unquote, targeting China with some of these tariffs, he's offered an incredible number of exemptions. So you still have iPhones and car parts and other things being made in China with minimal tariffs. And these are some of the most prominent things that get made in China. And two, China is able to work around the United States. So they can actually punish us in some ways more than we can punish them, because there are other countries which can export their goods to China, which means that they can significantly increase retaliatory tariffs on us. And meanwhile, we are not the only market for Chinese goods. They can sell to, much of the world. So even though that China's economy is weak right now, I think the efforts that Donald Trump is doing to limit China are not going to be successful because he's going it alone. If instead Donald Trump decided to work with the other countries of Southeast and East Asia to unite them in a trade agreement, to work with Europe and unite with Europe in a trade agreement that excluded China, then I think you would actually see significant pressure, and then China would be in a much more difficult position. But as it stands, even though the kind of, as Trump would like to say, the hand of cards that China's been dealt is actually not a very good one, we are making it easier for them. So I would say that's on the economic front. Then on the geopolitical front, because the Chinese economy is weakening, they need to rely upon nationalism to maintain support for the Chinese Communist Party. And the way that they're doing that is they are increasingly threatening Taiwan. And so over the course of the last 3 months, we have seen a significant military buildup around the island of Taiwan. We have seen increasingly bellicose rhetoric emanating from China, threatening the island. And my own prediction is that there is at least a 50% chance that over the course of the next 3.5 years, China may invade Taiwan and try to take it over. And if that were to happen, all bets are off. Because I could see that the world economy simply tanking, especially the technological sector, because, as you probably know, much of the world's chip production, microchip production, comes from Taiwan. So if China is able to take the island and then, either takes that chip production for itself, or that production gets destroyed in the process, suddenly, our iPhones and computers and so forth are, going to become a lot more expensive or a lot less effective.
Okay, back to the war in Ukraine. Do you think the US could really leave Ukraine alone? And if not, why are some politicians talking like they mind?
Look, I'm going to be honest with you. If you had asked me this question 6 months ago, I would have said no. That the U.S. simply can't, won't leave Ukraine behind because, Americans understand the importance of defending our allies and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, my answer to you today is different. Yes, there is a very real chance. In fact, I would say at least a 50% chance that the U.S. will leave Ukraine alone. Donald Trump has made that clear. One of his most important advisors, Elon Musk, has constantly been tweeting out Russian propaganda. His director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, is overtly pro-Putin. Tucker Carlson, who is overtly pro-Putin, is close to Donald Trump. And so if you look at the people that surround him, those that have the most power are the ones who are completely bought into Russian propaganda. Meanwhile, the ones who are more reasonable, arguably, people like Marco Rubio, people like General Kellogg, like the National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, they have clearly been sidelined. Just look at the statements coming out of Marco Rubio, where he's the one who said the other week that we might walk away. This is something that Senator Rubio a year ago would never have agreed to, right? A year ago, Senator Rubio was talking about how important Ukraine was to American interests. And today, suddenly, we're seeing a completely different person saying completely different things. So is it possible? The answer is yes. Now, there are two conclusions that we should draw from this. First, there is still a possibility for that to change because a majority of the American people, almost 60%, still support Ukraine. That is almost a supermajority of Americans, which means that politicians still have to listen to them. And within the Republican Party, there are still those who believe that America has responsibilities to its allies. And, in Congress, these are people like Congressman Bacon, Congressman Fitzpatrick, and others. They're not alone. And in the Senate, there's even more. And so what our job should be is to empower that part of the Republican Party and convince them, if needed, even to work with Democrats, not on everything, but just on the issues that really matter to American global leadership. And that's, there's an important opportunity here where, if we use language that resonates with these members of Congress, with these senators, there's a chance, again, that they could start bringing pressure to bear on the administration. Because Donald Trump, like I said earlier, is still not a dictator. He has to respond to Congress. He has to respond to his own party. So if they start coming together and putting pressure on him and telling him that he cannot and should not abandon Ukraine, then there's an opportunity to be had there. In fact, I'll go even one step further. I don't know if you saw this, but at the end of February, there was a bipartisan bill introduced in the House of Representatives that would prohibit American recognition of Crimea as part of the Russian Federation. And this is really important because Donald Trump has been threatening, and Steve Witkoff has been threatening to recognize the Russian annexation of Crimea. And so to see a bipartisan bill, both Republican and Democratic sponsors come together to prohibit the administration from doing so is an important signal. Unfortunately, that bill still hasn't passed, but it's not too late. There can be additional pressure brought to bear on these Republicans to try to constrain the power of the executive branch and try to kind of assert congressional authority, for Congress to say, no, the president does not do this alone. He must have congressional approval. So that's one sort of set of conclusions. And within that conclusion, I'm going to say something that, might be a little bit more controversial for folks. But the truth is that Ukraine needs a new ambassador in the United States. I have nothing against Ambassador Markarova. I have the utmost respect for her. I think she did a fantastic job, but she has been in office now for over 5 years, and her connections in Washington, D.C. are primarily with Democrats. So what Ukraine needs is a representative in Washington, D.C. who has a good relationship with Republicans, whom the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, never sent a letter about, basically asking President Zelensky Zelensky to recall them. So because again, I would remind viewers that about half a year ago or so, or a little more than that actually, Speaker Johnson sent a letter to Zelensky asking him to recall Ambassador Markarova. And again, Markarova is a perfectly capable person, and she could be the ambassador to any other country, in Europe or wherever else, and she would do a terrific job. But you need someone in America who can really develop close relationships with Republicans on the Hill and in the administration. And unfortunately, I do not think Ambassador Markarova is that person. And then last but not least, it's going to come down to Europe. Europe now needs to wake up, and they need to recognize that they can no longer rely upon America to guarantee European security. They need to start investing tens, hundreds of billions of dollars for their own defense, because Ukraine is a part of Europe. And it's going to be up to them to work with you guys to collaborate with Ukraine and make sure that Russia is unable to advance further. And the last thing I'll say on that is that there's a chance, perhaps, that if Europe were to convincingly and compellingly demonstrate that they are investing real effort and real resources into this defense, that could potentially delay the American withdrawal from the region, right? Because if they can show sort of this administration that they are serious and that they're not going anywhere and that they are, militarily serious partners, that does increase the likelihood and increase sort of the ammunition that Republicans on the Hill have with which to pressure the administration. Because then, Fitzpatrick and Bacon and Wilson and so forth, they can point to Europe and say, look, Europe is stepping up. They're serious about their defense. We cannot abandon them now. So by partnering with Europe and by deepening that relationship, I think that Ukraine and European countries can actually increase the possibility that America stays engaged.
And just one small detail. Trump didn't say he'd leave Ukraine. He said he might leave the talks. So who is really pressuring, Russia or Ukraine? And a lot of people see this as a kind of manipulation. Many analysts say Trump can't really walk away from Ukraine because of the EU, because of NATO, and because it would just make him look weak.
So one, Trump doesn't care about NATO, at all. So I think the first point is irrelevant. The second point does matter. Trump does not like to look weak. But Trump has been very clear and very vocal that he doesn't want to be part of this war, that he doesn't want to support Ukraine, that he does not like Ukraine, he does not believe Ukraine. And so, again, a few months ago, I think I would have given you a different answer. But I think today we have seen enough from this administration that we should have no illusions. There is nothing stopping Donald Trump from walking away, not just from talks, but from supporting Ukraine altogether. I think that is a hard truth, but it's something that Kyiv needs to understand. It's something that Paris, Brussels, London, Berlin, I think all of the European capitals need to understand that as well, that there's a real chance that the United States walks away from this. Again, Donald Trump himself hasn't said that, but there have been clear implications, right? I mean, Donald Trump has said now numerous times, most recently just a week or two ago, that he believes that it was essentially Zelensky who started this war, not Putin. He said that he doesn't like Zelensky. In fact, he has said more nice things about Putin than he ever has about Zelensky. And that is, again, it's just a hard truth that we have to recognize. And I think, believing that Donald Trump could walk away from the talks, but then maintain or increase support for Ukraine. Is it possible? Yes. Is it likely? Absolutely not. And therefore, hope this wishful thinking, this hope that Donald Trump might maintain or increase his support for Ukraine is not a viable strategy. And so, it's the job of Europeans, it's the job of Ukrainians to move forward with a viable strategic plan and not rely upon the wishful thinking that, well, maybe Donald Trump might not walk away. Because again, maybe he won't, but the way that we increase the likelihood that he doesn't is precisely by taking seriously the threat that he might.
We just saw the Easter ceasefire. Do you think Trump was satisfied with that? Here in Ukraine, we clearly see that Putin is playing games. But does Trump see that too? And how long do you think he'll keep tolerating Putin's behavior?
It's a good question. I don't know. I'll be honest, I haven't looked at the Twitter profiles of Elon Musk or Trump or some of the other figures in the last couple of days. And what's crazy to say is I think one of the ways we can get hints at whether or not they're buying into this nonsense from Putin is to see what they said on Twitter. My intuition is that Putin's goal was definitely to show Trump that, oh, well, look, this is, me being serious about peace talks, and really it's Zelensky and those bad, evil Ukrainians who are the ones perpetuating this war. Whether or not Trump believes it, again, I don't know what he believes, but I will tell you that I have been obviously following Trump now for years, and I have never heard him say a bad word about Putin. I have only heard him say bad things about Ukraine and Zelensky and our other allies. I mean, he has insulted almost every leader in the world except for Putin. So, do I think Trump bought this nonsense ceasefire that was never really true anyway? But, Putin was still killing Ukrainians. I think there's a good chance he did buy it, unfortunately. I think that we need to recognize the game that we're playing, and if we want to play it, I think we need to be serious about it. And we have to recognize that, the people who are in this administration are not the most serious foreign policy experts that we generally see in both Republican and Democratic administrations. Instead, the people with the greatest influence over American foreign policy are political commentators and television hosts, right? I mean, I'll remind you that our Secretary of Defense, the only real expertise he has, the only real professional experience he has is as a Fox News host. So by implication, you could become the next Minister of Defense of Ukraine, right? As a host who interviews people for a living. And I think we need to, so as a result, recognizing that, what the implication is that we need to speak in ways that these people understand, right? That we're not dealing with the Fiona Hills of the world, with the General Ben Hodgeses, with, these types of folks. We're dealing with Pete Hegseth. We're dealing with Elon Musk, Tucker Carlson. And therefore, these folks react to the type of simplistic games that people like Putin excel at. They're really good at these games. And unfortunately, that means that the free world, free countries like Ukraine, must also play some of these games.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yesterday, Putin said he hit civilians and tried to explain it by saying there were soldiers nearby. I remember a time when such thing could lead to an ACC arrest, but not now. How much damage do you think has been done to international law and global security?
I mean, a huge amount of damage. The fact is that the ICC, the International Criminal Court, their credibility, I think, is deeply questionable, because at the same time as putting out an arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin, a dictator who could never be held responsible in his own country, they also put out arrest warrants for Israeli leaders. And you can say what you will about the Israeli war, about the war in Gaza, and I've certainly been critical of it. But, Israel is a democracy, and Israel has arrested and imprisoned numerous former presidents and prime ministers. And the whole point of the International Criminal Court is to try to bring people to justice who cannot be brought to justice in their own countries. So the fact that Vladimir Putin is now, quote unquote, friendly with the United States, despite having this arrest warrant out on him, despite the fact that he is clearly trying to orchestrate a genocide in Ukraine, is going to massively affect both our credibility in the world, American credibility in the world, and the credibility of this rules-based international system, which has guaranteed the greatest prosperity for humankind in our history since the end of World War II. Obviously, there have been wars and there have been problems between 1945 and today, but the last 80 years have been arguably, in my mind, the most successful, prosperous, safest years in all of human history. Mm-hmm. And right now, that system that has allowed for that prosperity and safety, that system is under attack. And unless other free countries, Europe, Ukraine, Australia, Japan, Canada, and so forth, unless all these free countries come together and they announce in one voice that they reject the dismantlement and destruction of this system, that they will not rest until people like Putin are brought to justice, that they will not accept the rise of dictators around the world, unless we see something like that happen, I think that there's a real risk of that system unraveling and the world becoming a much more dangerous place.
Mm-hmm. So, Uriel, thank you. Thank you. That was Uriel Epstein with us today. Thank you for being here, and see you next time.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm sorry for the some of the bad news here.
No problem.